I am a soldier, a survivor of war, returned from the brink only to bury my wife. For the past 7 years, we shared a silent grief. She couldn't conceive. At least, that's what I believed. Now, my sister appears with a newborn and an incredible story of a secret surrogate pregnancy for us. My parents side with her, and my wife's estate becomes a spoils of war. How do you fight when the battlefield is your own home, and the enemy shares your blood? I am Donovan 35, a Special Forces major. Half my life has been spent in places where gunfire and blood were the only languages. Others called it duty. I called it a job. They trained us for every scenario on the battlefield, how to survive, fight, and calculate every risk. But they had no manual for personal tragedy. Life can change in a second. 1 second I was a husband. The next I was just a man receiving a call that my wife, Elara, had died in a horrific car accident while I was halfway across the world. They said I was lucky to have survived so many battles. I felt like I died with her that day. Returning this time, Elara wasn't waiting at the door. 7 months had passed since that call. The house was now too big, too silent. Every corner held traces of her, but she was no longer there. The pain wasn't just losing Elara, it was losing an entire future we never had. We had tried for children for years. Elara used to tell me it was her fault, that her body couldn't give me a child, and that gnawed at me every day, seeing the sorrow in her eyes each time another treatment failed. I was there, holding her hand, telling her that just having her was enough, but I knew we both yearned for more. Now, that dream was buried with her. My parents, Malcolm and Sylvia, handled almost everything after the accident. I returned from my deployment in a haze, and they were there, arranging the funeral, hosting visitors. I was grateful for it. Every Thursday night, I started attending a support group for veterans. It was the only place I could shed my uniform and the major's facade, sitting among others who bore invisible scars. The silence there was more comforting than the silence in my empty house. But leaving there, I faced another shift, one within my own family. Before, my parents never truly understood my military path. Their favoritism always lay with my sister, Phoebe. But after the tragedy, they seemed to pay more attention to me. Malcolm, who once saw my enlistment as a foolish choice, now asked me about my work, about the battlefield. Sylvia started cooking family dinners every weekend. For the first time, they seemed to see me. In return, and as a way to maintain this new connection, I started sending them $5,000 every month. A form of compensation, I supposed. Those weekend dinners became a routine. My father, who previously only asked superficial questions, now started inquiring about my work. "How's the new training, Don?" he asked during one meal, pouring me a glass of wine. "Same as always," I replied. "Tough, but necessary." He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Good. Got to keep yourself busy." It was a small conversation, but it meant something. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the family's perplexing choice, but a son. Perhaps, in tragedy, we had finally found common ground. I clung to that thought, completely unaware of how fragile and false the foundation of this newfound connection truly was. That new peace didn't last. It ended one Sunday evening, right in the middle of dinner. The door opened, and my sister, Phoebe, walked in. She entered the dining room with an 8-month pregnant belly, and Malcolm and Sylvia's faces immediately lit up. Their eyes left me, shifting entirely to their youngest daughter. I knew this feeling. I'd been accustomed to it since childhood. I just sat there, raised my wine glass, listening to them ooh and ah, as if they'd never seen a pregnant woman before. My mother, Sylvia, hastily stood up, abandoning the conversation she was having with me. "Phoebe, darling, why didn't you call ahead?" She quickly pulled up a chair, gently nudging me aside to make way. "Sit down, dear. Do you need a pillow? Are your feet swollen?" My father, who had just been nodding in agreement with a comment of mine, now turned completely towards Phoebe. his eyes radiant. Dinner continued. But now every conversation revolved around Phoebe, the baby, and her plans. I waited for a lull, and then interjected a simple question. So, who's the father? The atmosphere at the table froze. But before I could say more, Sylvia cut me off. Don, you don't need to meddle. It's her private business. Malcolm nodded too, the familiar nod of a man who had chosen sides before I even spoke. Phoebe sat up straight, her voice firm. I don't need anyone's help. I can raise my child on my own. I remained silent. How interesting. When Alara and I were struggling with treatments, they wanted to know every detail. Now Phoebe's privacy was sacrosanct. I looked at her belly, then into Phoebe's eyes. Kids are expensive, Phoebe. How do you plan to manage on your own? Her familiar smug smile appeared. The smile I'd seen right before her scented candle company went bankrupt, or when she lost all her money on an online fashion project. Don't you worry about me, she said, patting her belly. I have everything planned. Everything is under control. I didn't react. I just remembered not long ago, she'd burned through all her money on an online fashion venture, leaving behind a year-long debt. Someone like that suddenly talking about taking care of a child on her own. It sounded as illogical as a math problem missing numbers. My father looked at her as if she had just found the cure for cancer. That's my girl, he said proudly. Always knows how to stand on her own 2 feet. I cut a piece of meat, chewing slowly. The familiar feeling of being second best was now mingled with something else. A warning sign. That smile should have been a red flag. As a soldier, I was taught to recognize signs, patterns of behavior, and I recognized this pattern. Phoebe was planning something, and it wouldn't be good. A few weeks later, Phoebe called me. Again, that sweet voice she only used when she wanted something. Don, next weekend I'm having a baby shower at Mom and Dad's. I'd really love for you to come. An invitation. Unusual. I could count on one hand the number of times Phoebe had proactively invited me to anything. I'll be there, I replied curtly. Curiosity had won out over caution. I wanted to see where this play would go. That Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house with a carefully wrapped gift, an expensive baby crib. An appropriate gift, not ostentatious, not too cheap to be scorned. As I stepped into the party room, I had to pause for a few seconds. Balloons, tiered cakes, tables draped in white, gifts piled high. Unbelievably extravagant. For someone who had just lost all her money on a delusional business venture, this was an excessive display. She floated through the crowd in a luxurious maternity dress, a radiant smile constantly on her face. But her eyes were different. Throughout the party, I clearly felt Phoebe's gaze. She held my eyes a little longer than usual, a look full of hidden meaning, as if checking my reaction. As if I were an important part of her plan. After a few insipid games, it was time for the gift opening. Phoebe put on quite a performance. She exclaimed over every baby outfit, every tiny toy. When it came to my gift, she paused for a moment, her fingers tracing the wooden rail of the crib. Then, she did something I didn't expect. She picked up a glass, tapping it gently to attract attention. The room fell silent. I want to thank everyone for coming today, Phoebe began, one hand on her belly. But there's something more important I need to say. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room, then stopping at me. A sad, carefully calculated smile appeared on her lips. As you all know, Donovan and Alara tried for years to have a child but couldn't due to her health issues. Her love for my brother was so great that, before she passed, she secretly enacted a final plan. She took a deep breath, letting the drama build. She asked me to be their surrogate. A collective gasp of astonishment spread through the room. I didn't react. I just stood there, expressionless, observing. Phoebe continued, her voice now slightly trembling as if holding back emotion. This was a secret between Alara and me. She wanted to surprise Donovan when he returned. She said she used the sperm samples Donovan had stored at the clinic for IVF. This baby is my brother's flesh and blood. Her voice broke into perfectly controlled sobs. Because Alara has passed, This baby is her only legal heir. As the child's mother, I am entitled to half of Alara's estate to care for her son's future. The room erupted in whispers. I looked at Phoebe. Her earlier mysterious smile was now clear. And then I looked at my parents. They weren't surprised. Both Malcolm and Sylvia nodded, slowly and solemnly, as if they were honored witnesses to the charade. Not a hint of hesitation, not a crack in their faces. They had known. They had even accepted it. For a moment, my parents' living room transformed into a war zone. The enemy had revealed themselves. The objective was clear, and I was standing in the middle of the battlefield, without a weapon, without a plan. The murmurs of the crowd were like a buzzing hive. Phoebe's fake sobs, and above all, my parents' complicit silence. Seeing that I didn't crumble as she expected, Phoebe delivered another blow. She pulled out her phone. "If anyone still doubts," she said, her voice trembling, but her eyes cold. Then here, she scrolled through a series of photos, pictures of her and Alara sitting at a cafe, looking intimate, one of them outside a clinic gate, and then carefully edited text messages, undated, without context. Only carefully selected phrases. "Thank you for doing this for us. This will be our secret." A surrogacy agreement constructed with a few blurry photos and soulless phrases. I didn't say a word. Placing my empty wine glass on the table, the sharp sound of glass on wood echoing in the sudden silence, I turned and walked away. "Donovan, wait!" My mother called after me, her voice full of feigned panic. I didn't stop. I walked through the crowd, which parted like water, exited the door, and didn't look back. Back home, I sat in the darkness, memories flooding over me like a storm. The times Alara said she was going to see a fertility specialist. The times she smiled, hiding her fatigue after a treatment. I had believed it was our last attempt to have a child. Now, every sweet memory was tainted with suspicion. How long had they been planning this? Phoebe, my parents, they had watched us, waiting for Alara to die, waiting for me to return, shattered and off guard. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness, my anger not flaring into a fire, but freezing into an iceberg in my chest, cold, sharp, and focused. They weren't just trying to steal my money. They were trying to steal my memories of her, and I wouldn't let them do it. The next day my phone rang. It was my father. I let it ring through. A second time. A third. On the fourth ring I answered and remained silent. "Donovan." Malcolm's voice boomed. Not consoling at all, but cold as a command. "You have to be responsible. Phoebe has sacrificed so much. That baby is yours, and he deserves what's his." I gripped the phone tightly, every joint tensing. "Sacrifice?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "Sacrifice on my pain and Alara's." On the other end, my mother interjected, softly but starkly, "Son, we knew about this plan beforehand. Your father and I thought it was a good solution. The family needed a grandchild. Phoebe needed support too. This was a way to keep everything stable." "To me," I said slowly, each word like a bullet, "you are all dead." I laughed, a dry, hollow sound echoing in the empty room. Something shattered inside me, but it wasn't weakness. It was the last shred of trust I had for them. "To me," I roared, each word sharp as a knife, "you are all dead." I hung up, blocked their numbers, immediately logged into my account, canceled the monthly $5,000 transfer. The lifeline of our family relationship was cut. No turning back. Less than a week later, I received an email. Subject: legal notice. Sender: Phoebe's legal representative, through her lawyer. Officially demanding I voluntarily transfer half of Alara's estate, or face a lawsuit. Voluntarily. A truly brazen word. Rumors began to spread. At the base, I started noticing strange glances, whispers as I passed. An officer's family drama was always a juicy topic. My commanding officer, Colonel Kalen Vance, called me into his office. "Reese," he said, looking straight at me, "I don't care about rumors. I just need to know if it's affecting your work. No, Colonel, I replied. Good, he nodded. But I suggest you take some leave. Clean up this mess. I just nodded. No argument, no objection. In the military, I could handle any mission. But here, the enemy wasn't on the front lines. It was sitting in my own family. A few weeks later, a distant relative called. I heard heavy breathing on the other end. Then the short, knife-like statement. Phoebe just gave birth. A baby boy. I was silent. Then the relative continued, hesitantly. She named him Donovan Riss Jr. In that moment, I no longer felt pain, only cold emptiness. Like a corpse that had been buried a second time, I thought everything would just remain threats. But then, the summons appeared in my mailbox, bearing the clear seal of the court. Phoebe had officially sued me for half of Alara's estate. I took the stack of papers to Isolde Croft. She was called the cold scalpel of the court. 40 years in the profession, never a compromise. Croft's office was small, neat, smelling only of old paper and strong coffee. She read the lawsuit, tapped her pen on the file, then looked up at me. Croft flipped through the documents. Your sister's story is emotionally compelling, Major Reese, she said, her voice even. A single mother, a newborn, a deceased wife. The jury will be easily swayed. What evidence do they have? A few photos, a few edited text messages, I replied. Weak, but enough to cause trouble, she concluded. We need something solid to counterattack. I knew she was right. And I had nothing. That night I was reviewing the lawsuit when my phone rang. A strange international number. I answered. Major Reese, a woman's voice chimed. Calm, elegant, with an accent I didn't recognize. Yes, I'm Genevieve Dubois, she said. Ilara's mother. I was stunned. Ilara had spoken of a mother living far away in Europe. The two had almost no contact. For years, that name had never appeared in our lives. And now, she was calling me directly. How did you? I have my connections, Major. She interrupted. I've heard about what's happening. They're slandering my daughter's memory. And I won't let that happen. Her voice held no tremor, only a steely resolve. I need to see you. Immediately. There are things you need to know. A day later, I sat opposite her in a quiet cafe. Genevieve Dubois exuded natural nobility. Not a show of wealth, but the quiet power of someone who had navigated many layers of life. She placed a thick, neatly bound folder on the table. This is what my daughter hid from you, she said, her voice soft but firm. Not to deceive, but to protect you. I opened the envelope. Inside were medical records from a leading specialist clinic. Patient name, Donovan Reese. And then I read the words, complex medical terms. But the conclusion was clear as a gunshot. Permanent infertility due to old trauma. A shrapnel fragment from years ago. A scar I had almost forgotten. I looked up at Genevieve, trying to process everything in my head. Ilara was not infertile, she said, as if reading my thoughts. She was perfectly healthy. But she knew how much a soldier like you, a strong man, would suffer knowing this truth. So, she carried that burden herself for all these years. She paused, her eyes looking directly into mine. Their real plan was to use a sperm donor. She did it because she loved you immensely, Donovan. I sat there, stunned. The entire narrative of our marriage, of our pain, was suddenly rewritten. The sorrow I had seen in Ilara's eyes wasn't because she couldn't have children. It was the sorrow of having to lie to the man she loved, every day. And Phoebe's lie. The lie about the stored sperm sample. It had just collapsed. I picked up the folder. This wasn't just evidence. This was my weapon. And it was handed to me by a woman I had never known, but who was now my only ally. On the day of the trial, I wore my best dress uniform, not to show off, but as a reminder to myself of discipline and honor. On the other side, Phoebe sat with her lawyer, holding the baby. My parents sat directly behind her, a solid wall of support. Phoebe looked pale, tired, perfect for the role of a sacrificing single mother. As soon as the trial began, she cried. Her tears fell perfectly, each trembling word cutting like a knife. I did everything for my brother, for my sister-in-law, to keep their bloodline going. The room murmured, a few heads nodding. In the back row, I saw my mother wipe away tears, while my father sat upright, proud. Her lawyer concluded by presenting those blurry photos and edited messages, a touching story constructed from flimsy pieces. Then it was our turn. Croft stood up, without an ounce of haste. She didn't attack Phoebe. Instead, she called a medical expert to testify, confirming the legitimacy of a set of records. Then, she turned to the judge. Your Honor, we would like to present medical evidence directly relevant to this case. Croft placed my folder on the table. These are the medical records of my client, Major Donovan Reese, showing he is permanently infertile due to an injury sustained during his service. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken. Phoebe's lawyer immediately stood up. Objection. These documents are irrelevant and could be falsified. Croft smiled an icy cold smile. Very well. If my esteemed colleague believes these records are falsified, we have a simpler solution to verify Miss Ramsey's claim that the child is my client's. She turned to me, then back to the judge. We request the court to order an immediate paternity DNA test. It was a direct hit. I looked at Phoebe. Her calm facade shattered. Color drained from her face, leaving a horrifying pallor. She clutched the baby tighter, her panicked eyes darting to my parents. They too were stunned. Their play had gone off script. That's unnecessary, her lawyer stammered. Why is it unnecessary? Croft retorted, her voice sharp as a blade. If the child truly is my client's, then this is the fastest way to conclude this lawsuit and secure the child's rights. Unless your client knows what the results will be. The judge stared at Phoebe, who was trembling. The silence stretched. Finally, the judge pounded her gavel. The court orders a DNA test. The results came back 2 weeks later. We returned to court. The judge unsealed the envelope. She read the conclusion aloud, her voice echoing. The test results show the probability of Major Donovan Reese being the father of the child is 0%. A collective gasp filled the room. Phoebe collapsed. Her tears this time were real. The judge looked at her, her gaze stern. Miss Ramsey, do you wish to explain to the court this act of deception? Amidst sobs, Phoebe confessed everything. About Julian, the musician who abandoned her. The mounting debts. The envy of her brother's honor. Career. A wife she could never measure up to. And then the sordid plan was hatched. Every photo, every edited message, all just to extract what Ilara had left behind. The judge delivered the verdict immediately. The lawsuit was dismissed. Phoebe was severely reprimanded for perjury and fraud. The battle was over. I had won. But I felt no joy. Only emptiness. I stood up, adjusted my uniform, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind the wreckage of my family. Outside the courthouse, the bright sunlight made me squint. Malcolm and Sylvia blocked my path. They looked 10 years older, their smugness gone, replaced only by despair. Donovan. Son, my mother began, reaching out to me. We didn't know. Phoebe deceived us. I looked straight at her, devoid of emotion. Their last weak lie. We're having difficulties, my father interjected, his voice faint. Ever since you stopped sending money. I didn't reply. I just quietly took out my phone, in front of them, deleted the last remaining contacts, and blocked their numbers permanently. Then, I walked around them. Without a backward glance, that relationship was buried right there, on the steps of the courthouse. Genevieve was waiting for me by her car. She said nothing, just placed a hand on my shoulder. A simple gesture that contained a depth of understanding I had never received from my own parents. You restored Ilara's honor, I said, my voice hoarse. And mine too. It's what Ilara would have wanted, she replied softly. A few weeks later, I handed Genevieve a key. It was the key to the lakeside cabin where Alara and I had made our happiest memories. I can't, she refused. Please take it, I said. You gave me the truth. Let me give you a place of peace. She hugged me, and for the first time in months, I felt I wasn't entirely alone. We began to build a new relationship, not mother-in-law and son-in-law, but two people sharing a loss and a love. We met every week, telling stories about Alara together. Through her stories, I saw a different Alara, a strong daughter, a woman whose love was so deep she was willing to carry a painful secret to protect the man she loved. The truth didn't erase the pain, but it reshaped it. Now, when I think of Alara, I don't just feel loss, but an immense gratitude and admiration. I returned to service, but with a different mindset. The wound was still there, but it was no longer a weakness. It was a reminder of betrayal, of sacrifice, and of true love. I had lost my blood family in a dirty war of greed, but I had found a new family in truth and honor. My life had taken a turn I never planned. But perhaps this was the path I was meant to walk, a path without Alara by my side, but always guided by her love.